Hello, it's Justin Colletti of SonicScoop. Thanks for joining me for this week's episode of the SonicScoop podcast. Let me know if you can see me and hear me in the live chat. Really excited to have you with me. I started off today's live stream without any audio, so hopefully I'll cut that out of the live stream when we go live. But here we go. Justin Colletti of SonicScoop. Thanks for joining me for this week's episode of the SonicScoop podcast. And today we're going to be looking at an extremely renowned and acclaimed mixer by the name of Andy Wallace. Andy Wallace is someone who was huge in the 90s, early 2000s, and he worked on so many of the biggest records, I'm going to say, in rock history, but not only rock music, also in metal history, pop punk, hip hop, really across genres. But I'd say he's best known for his work with some of the big grunge bands, like Nirvana is a huge one. He worked with Screaming Trees, but also he was really seminal in changing the way metal records sound. The reason Nirvana hired Andy Wallace is because they heard and loved Slayer's Rain and Blood record. And if you listen to Slayer records before Andy Wallace and Slayer records after Andy Wallace, there are some big differences there. And we'll look at those too. But not just that, hip hop. He was seminal in the beginning of hip hop. He worked with Run DMC and Aersosmith on their early big hits together. And later on, we'll listen to some Beastie Boys records that he worked on as well. There's a whole bunch of cool stuff to look at with Andy Wallace. He's also huge when it came to pop punk stuff. Bands like Bad Religion and The Descendants and so many others. Blink-182, there's just too many to name. And also some mainstream pop artists like Sheryl Crow, Jeff Buckley. He produced the Grace record that Jeff Buckley did that was a really big one. So we're going to take a deep dive into his work. I'd say his work is kind of most popular from the early 90s through the early 2000s, maybe into the kind of mid-20 teens. He's maybe tapered off a little bit in notoriety in recent years as far as like super recent releases go, but his albums and the mixes he's done haven't, because he has worked on some of the most enduring records in each of the genres he's been involved in. And we're going to take a deep dive into his work, his sounds, and we're going to do a whole bunch of before and after audio examples where we're going to compare records that Andy Wallace mixed to the songs that were mixed by others, often on the very same album, with the very same producer, in the same studio, with the same mastering engineer. And the only thing different here is going to be the mixing engineer. I've got back-to-back comparisons here for you on a Beastie Boys mix that Andy Wallace did compared to that of another mixer. The same song, Smells Like Teen Spirit, Andy Wallace versus Butch Vig. A Bad Religion song where Andy Wallace remixed a Bad Religion song from before his time, and we can hear what he would have done maybe with some earlier Bad Religion albums. There's a ton of examples in here. We'll listen to a bunch of these. Man, he did all these Rage Against the Machine records. He did all these Linkin Park records. He did a record with the Strokes, a bunch of records with At the Drive-In, System of a Down, and we'll be able to do some comparisons there as well. Often on the same album when I can, and on certain occasions, comparing one album to another. Before I get into it, I just got to get the briefest of shout-outs going to our sponsors. Our most important sponsor, as always, is you. How do you sponsor this podcast? By hitting the like button, by hitting subscribe, by leaving a comment. Or if you're on the audio-only versions like Apple Podcasts, consider giving us a 5-star rating and review. Really does help spread the word. All right, another quick shout out and thanks. I want to let you know about Soundtoys. Those guys have got a huge sale going on right now. There's a flash sale over at soundtoys.com. Definitely check it out. They have, I think it's up to 70% off plugins right now. Let me take you over to their website. Bam, bam, up to 70% off Soundtoys plugins. Some of their plugins are as cheap as $29 right now. Check them out, soundtoys.com, and check out a free 30-day trial. Also, a big shout out to Baby Audio. If you go over to babyaud.io, that's babyaud.io/SonicScoop, you can get a 15% discount on any of the stuff over at Baby Audio. Again, some really creative, fun effects, often that do absolutely far-fetched and insane things, or help you get better sounds with really fun, really intuitive, really easy to use interfaces. So can't recommend their stuff highly enough. All right, last shout out before we get into it is once more to you for the best way to sponsor this podcast, which is check out one of our great full-length courses like Mixing Breakthroughs, Mastering Demystified, Compression Breakthroughs, EQ Breakthroughs. They are guaranteed to change the way you work forever for the better or your money back. All right, with all that yakking out of the way, let's dive right into listening to some of Andy Wallace's work. And before I play the first song for you, I want to give you some of my tasting notes on Andy Wallace. What are we looking for in his mix? Well, these are some of the things that I think are going to be unique in Andy Wallace. One of the first things that people talk about with Andy Wallace is his use of snare samples and kick drum samples. And there's a little bit of confusion here where Andy Wallace doesn't necessarily always straight out replace snare samples. Like he doesn't completely replace recorded snare drums with snare samples. Usually he does more of a sample augmentation process where he talks about doing this on Nevermind, where he's taking some really artificial sounding drum machine-like snare sounds and then running those into reverb, ambient effects. So we're not always hearing a snare sample just overlaid and replacing an original drum sample. Instead, the snare sample is there to trigger reverb and ambient effects. So the benefits there are we don't get a whole bunch of cymbal wash and drum bleed from other drums into the reverbs, so we can get a cleaner reverb. We can get more abundant reverb without having to worry about all this other stuff washing into it. And we get some of that elongating, fattening tone of the sample augmentation of that sample without it completely stepping over and completely replacing the original live played sample. And this is important, I think, because a lot of the bands that Andy has worked with are bands that are playing together, that are using real drums, that have good drummers in many cases. Dave Grohl is an acclaimed drummer working with Nirvana. Who is it for Blink-182? In his style, is it Travis Barker? Is that his name? People who like that band really like that drummer. And we don't necessarily want to destroy every single nuance and every little bit of humanity of what they're doing, but we want a sound that's going to stand up on the radio airwaves and is going to potentially be on records that are bought millions of times, or in today's parlance, streamed hundreds of millions or billions of times. So that's one of the things, how he treats kick and snare, often with sample augmentation, not just always straight sample replacement. But I'd also say in drums, one of the things we're going to hear in Andy's work is the way that his cymbals sound. And I think it's pretty different from some other mixers. I think that his way of treating cymbals, I think, became popular, where for me, it sounds like on his overheads, and part of the reason we hear some of the sample, even though we're not using a ton of direct sample, is that he's treating his overheads, I think, often getting rid of low frequencies and low mids in the cymbals and getting rid of extreme high frequencies in the cymbals. So you'll find this one area in the upper mids or the lower highs where the cymbals are really kind of forward and present and very detailed and clear and extremely well localized. You can point them out like, oh, the hi-hats are over here on this one. And they're present, but without overtaking other elements and without a ton of extra sizzly, unnecessary, extreme high frequency stuff going on. So that's another thing I hear in him. The other two big things I hear in some of these Andy mixes, and hopefully you can listen along for some of these things with me, is bass. Andy is really a master of getting bass to sit extremely well in mixes. And sometimes his basses are going to be more apparent than we'll hear from a competing mixer. That's something that I often hear from him, is just to be able to get out every intricacy in a bass line without having the bass completely take over in the mix. And I'll give you some examples of that. And last but not least, major thing I want to point out here is just how relatively uncompressed Andy Wallace's mixes are compared to what we've become used to in the past 10 to 15 years. Since 2010 and beyond, records have been getting louder and louder, where it's not uncommon for rock records to be like -5 LUFS at all times. And that was not the norm when Andy was doing his thing. But we also just don't hear a ton of compression in Andy's work because that's not how he decided to get a lot of his dynamic range control. He's a big believer in automation, a ton of automation, writing things like basses to bring out individual notes, writing things like vocals to make them feel really consistent without making them feel really compressed. Andy Wallace, in his approach, is generally only compressing things here and there by a few dB. And he has usually mix bus compression, with the SSL mix bus compressors maybe doing a significant portion of his compression, 2 dB, 4 dB, or more. But what's going into that is a whole bunch of painstaking gain staging, fader rides, and maybe level rides written into a computer that then go into the bus compressor. And it's a very different sound than just pegging a vocal with a ton of compression. He is, in addition to his SSL compressors on the SSL console using those individual compressors, he'll occasionally use, I believe, an LA2A outboard for vocal compression. But a lot of his vocal dynamics come from really extensive riding, which is, again, a different vibe than what we hear on a lot of records today. So if you want to go back in time to the way records sounded 20 years ago, or I guess it's 30 years ago now, in the 90s, and you want to take a tip from the Andy Wallace playbook, that would be it. But if you want to go for those things that distinguish modern record production from Andy Wallace's heyday, then some of those things that distinguish it are: put more compression on your vocals, more fast attack compression on your vocals, tons of it, way too much of it. So if there's a certain Andy Wallace-ish quality that you want to avoid, you want to get even more contemporary, even more hyped up, those are some of the things to almost reverse, where you do a ton of compression first, and then after that, think more about your automation. And the automation you might be doing would be clip gain before your compressors, so your compressors are hitting really evenly, really consistently, and then maybe doing a bulk of your automation after that. Samson Loves You says, Nirvana hasn't been mentioned yet. Untrue. I think I mentioned, did I not mention that? My goodness, I did have a false start of this intro where my audio was off, so maybe I forgot to mention Nirvana the second time, but of course, he mixed Nirvana's Nevermind. And that's going to be our first example here, is a comparison between Andy Wallace mixing Nevermind and Butch Vig, the producer of Nevermind, mixing Nevermind, which I believe the Butch Vig mix was released in 2011. And we'll get to hear exactly what the differences would have been if Butch Vig had done the entire album of Nevermind. Let me make myself a little smaller here on screen, and I think I can also go ahead and bring up, let's play fast and loose. I'll bring up my whole entire screen, so I can also show you guys the frequency analyzer as we go along. I'll bring up SPL's Hawkeye here. All right, let me know if this is coming through for you loud and clear. I'm going to turn up my audio level just a tiny touch more. Let's get that boosted. And here we go. On this playlist, all the odd number tracks are a track that was mixed by Andy Wallace, and all the even number tracks are tracks that were mixed by someone else, often on the same album, by the same artist, same producer, same mastering engineer, and in some cases on an album right before or right after the one Andy did. In this case, same album, same producer, same song. Here's the Andy Wallace mix of Smells Like Teen Spirit, and then we'll jump into the Butch Vig mix. Here we go. All right, I'm certain you've heard this song almost as many times as I have, so we'll stop it there. But that's the vibe of his mix. Now let's hear what it would have sounded like if Butch Vig had mixed this record. Here's the Butch Vig mix of Smells Like Teen Spirit. What are some of the differences you hear? Let me know in the chat box and in the comments. So also a good mix. And if you're not super in tune to listening for mixes, maybe you don't consciously hear a ton of differences. But I'm going to go back and play you some excerpts here so you can make some of these differences conscious. The biggest differences to me is, well, first of all, Butch Vig's mix is fine. Butch Vig's mix works. Things are well balanced. It's a slightly moodier sounding mix. The overall frequency balance in Butch Vig's mix, it's like he has this bigger scoop going in the center mids, like it's more the scooped out, hollowed out feeling. And he has this much more kind of massive, low mid kind of bottom end energy. And there's ways in which Butch Vig has the more muscular sounding mix. And his drums are a little bit more punchy. The snare and kick leap out at you even more in Butch Vig's mix. Some of the differences in Andy's is one of the things that happens in Andy's mixes is there's this smoothness about them. Although you can really precisely hear what's happening in the kick and snare, he's not putting all this excessive muscular energy into them. He's letting that be taken over a little bit more by the guitars and the vocals, and he's doing some more interesting things around the vocals. He does this kind of left-right vocal panning thing. He's doing some ear candy stuff, but some of the biggest things for me is just the little bit of additional lift that we get in the chorus in Andy's. And then once you feel like there was some lift in the chorus, there's a little bit more lift still in like the back half of the chorus. There's a little bit more of ambience and spaciousness around things like guitars. And again, Andy's tone is just a little bit tighter. It's less scooped in the mid-range. And if anything, we have this kind of forward mid-range, around 1K, around 2K, where it's just pushing forward a little bit more. We can hear a difference, I think, in the guitar tone just in the beginning. Here's Butch Vig's mix, just the opening guitar tone. Versus the opening guitar tone on Andy Wallace's mix. Do you hear the space around that? Like, Butch Vig's guitar tone is so dry, it's almost right up in your face, but there's already just this tiny hint of ambience around the electric guitar in Andy's. So one more time, here's Butch's. Bone dry, listen to that. Versus what's happening in Andy's. There's just a little bit more space around everything, right? And we even hear this little hint of a muted guitar strum in there with a little bit of ambience around it. There's a little bit of white noise hiss around Andy's. There's just these things giving it a little bit of depth and space and like sense of place, if that makes sense. One more time, this intro. Butch. Solid, muscular, but a little boomy. And now here's Andy Wallace. A little tighter, a little wider, a little bit more exciting, but also a little smoother at the same time. Even though it has this forward thing happening in the mid-range, there's this smoothness about the transients, and there's this degree of control that's in the kick drum and snare as well as prominence. Less muscular, less boomy, but definitely a mix that works as well. Let's hear some of the differences now in the main chorus. I'm going to play around the minute mark in both tracks and just listen to the difference, I think a big difference in how the drums are handled and to a degree how the guitars are handled. So here is Andy Wallace's mix. Versus Butch's mix, same spot. Right, it's just a little bit more murky, a little bit more congested, a little bit less space around it. And again, Butch Vig, totally competent mixer. He gets even better and better as he goes along in his career. But this reminds me a little bit more of the kind of sound that a guy like Jack Endino would have been getting, but a better version of that in the Seattle scene in the late 80s and early 90s. Like, it has that kind of feel. And I think hearing the Nevermind mixes changed Butch Vig's approach to mixing going forward, and informed him as well. So let's listen to this again, right around 1 minute. This is Butch Vig's mix. Big snare. So that's Butch Vig's mix. The snare, he wants to make sure you don't miss it. He's hammering you over the head with it. But one thing you do miss is around 1 minute and 25 seconds, Dave Grohl changes his cymbal pattern. And now he's changed which cymbals he's hitting and how he's hitting them right around 125. And you could totally miss that in Butch Vig's mix. But you're not going to miss as much in Andy Wallace's mix. Let's listen to that transition one more time. Listen for when he changes, like halfway through the chorus here, where the cymbal pattern changes. If you listen closely, you can faintly hear that in Butch's, but then listen to the same spot in Andy's. Here's Butch Vig's mix. Same thing in Andy Wallace's mix. So I think you can hear that in there. The shift in the cymbals is so much more pronounced in Andy's mix, because what he's doing is he's making those cymbals a little bit brighter. He's taking some of the kind of boxiness and low end and low mid out of the overhead. So he's using them a little bit more like cymbal mics. And then he's really putting his, what is it, like a crash cymbal or a splash cymbal that he's switching to. He's panning it over to the left-hand side. So it kind of jumps out at you. And you can hear the subtleties of what Dave's doing in the mix without the cymbals being overly annoyingly loud. And one of the other cool things in Andy's mix is instead of just hammering you over the head with the snare drum, it's like, okay, snare drum is important. It's one of the most important instruments in rock music, no question about it. But one of the unique and interesting things happening in this particular song is what's happening in the guitar. And it's the kind of like upstrums that Kurt is doing on his guitar that Andy's like, let's accent that. There's an accent that's happening in Kurt's guitar that we don't want to miss. That's one of the definitive things of this song. It's his strumming pattern. And I want to hear his strumming pattern cleanly, because before this song, this was not a common strumming pattern in rock music. And Andy is like, let's make what's happening with Kurt's pick attack and the strumming pattern stand out. Let's listen to that one more time, listening for the difference in Butch's mix, snare drum, and we don't hear a transition with the cymbals, versus Andy's mix, where we're going to hear that strumming pattern really come out more, and then we're really going to notice the changes that Dave Grohl is going to do in his cymbals. So here again is Butch Vig's mix. Man, you could have missed that cymbal transition, and you could miss how important the strumming pattern is. Now, Andy's. Great. And although the vocal is really well dynamically controlled, we never lose it. It's always consistent. It doesn't have this super compressed vocal sound. So hopefully you guys hear some of those differences. Let's get an even bigger difference. Same album, same song, same producer, same band, all of that. a song called American Jesus off of an album, I believe, called Recipe for Hate by Bad Religion. Now, I did get some complaints when we did the Steve Albini session on this. I played like a song that had like a lot of curse words in it. It was like super blasphemous, and some of my Christian viewers were like trying to play stuff like that. I don't think this one is super blasphemous. For those Christian viewers out there, I think it's more of like a, what's the word for it? Like a critique of American exceptionalism. So I think you can stand this one if you're in that camp. So I'm going to play the original mix, I think it was done by the producer of this album, of American Jesus. And then we will play Andy Wallace's remix of it. So here's the original.
By nationality, I'm a member of a growing populace. We import some popularity. There are things that seem to pull us under, and there are things that drag us down. But there's a power and a vital presence that's lurking all around. We got the American Jesus, see him on the interstate. We've got the American Jesus, he outbuilt the president's estate.
Great. So there's the original, and now here's the Andy Wallace remix. Off an album of Christmas songs that apparently Bad Religion did.
Cause I'm blessed by nationality. I'm a member of a growing populace. We import some popularity. There are things that seem to pull us under, and there are things that drag us down. But there's a power and a vital presence that's lurking all around. We've got the American Jesus, see him on the interstate. We've got the American Jesus, he outbuilt the president's estate.
So really everything about that mix is more betterer, right? It's just a better sounding mix. It is more processed, but in a way that like suits the material and makes it feel more like you're in a band, or in the room with a band, I should say. So what are some of the things that stand out? Well, there's a tremendous respect that Andy Wallace is doing for the original mix here, because one of the things that he's doing is in the verse, he's not actually amping up the kick and snare that much. You can totally hear the kick and snare. The pulse is totally there. But in Bad Religion style, he has that vocal really up front and center. These Bad Religion records are mixed sometimes almost like pop records, where the vocal is just really straight up front. Like they're kind of like a message band. Like they want you to let you know what their lyrics are. So like almost the inverse of Nirvana in a way. But he lets that almost karaoke quality of the voice stay, where it's like kind of sitting on top of the rest of the record. But unlike the original mix, where you have this kind of dull sounding band and this really bright and dry vocal on top of it, so there's this real karaoke separation. Andy, I think, is respecting that and saying that's the vibe of the band. That's how their mixes sound. That was the type of mix balance in the original. Let's not stray too far from that while just making things sound like they fit together better and making everything sound more massive and more alive. One of the other things that really sticks out for me again here is the bass. Andy is so great with allowing you to hear everything that's happening in the bass without the bass being overbearing and taking away from the guitars. So listen for that distinctly, the difference in the way the bass is handled in the original mix compared to the new one. So here's the original one more time.
By nationality, I'm a member of a growing populace. We import some popularity.
So the bass is there in the original, but it's almost like felt more than heard. It's like a pulse where you don't get to hear the exact like note definition of what's happening. Listen to that now, especially when we get to the verse in Andy's mix. Listen for the difference in the bass, as well as some of the differences here in the kick and snare where they're less loud, but just as audible, if that makes sense. I mean, those guitars are just way bigger and better already, right? Here's the guitars in the original versus the stereoizing and space that Andy's putting around the guitars in the new version. A little delay spread. All that definition on the bass.
I don't need to be a global citizen, cause I'm blessed by nationality. I'm a member of a growing populace. We enforce our popularity. There are things that seem to pull us under, and there are things that drag us down. But there's a power and a vital presence that's lurking all around. We've got the American Jesus, see him on the interstate. We've got
Versus same section in the original.
Oh,
that's the wrong track.
Power and a vital presence that's lurking all around.
That's Andy's. Let me get back to the original.
American Jesus, see him on the interstate. We've got the American Jesus, he outbuilt the president's estate.
Versus Andy's.
The American Jesus, he outbuilt the president's estate.
Right, just so much more detail. You actually get to hear the detail of the tom fills. You actually get to hear the detail of what the bass is playing while he's still respecting the original mix balances. So that is a big night and day difference. I hope that one is useful for you. Another one here, this is a smaller difference. I don't know why the Andy Wallace mix didn't make it onto this, but Beastie Boys record from 2005 called An Open Letter to New York City. The album is called To the Five Boroughs. The song is An Open Letter to New York City. Here is the original mix. And one of the things that really stands out for me on this one, again, is Andy's use of just little bits of ambience to open things up and his accenting of the bass and really getting to hear the cool things that are happening in the bass pattern. So here's the original mix of An Open Letter to NYC from the Beastie Boys.
Listen, all you New Yorkers.
Now let's hear Andy Wallace's mix of the same track. Tell me what you hear.
Listen, all you New Yorkers.
More ambience on even the intro. Wider. Left, right panning. Different kick. That bass. Where was that bass?
Brooklyn, Bronx, Queens, and Staten. From the Battery to the top of Manhattan. Asian, Middle Eastern, and Latin. Black, white, New York, you make it happen. Brownstones, water towers, trees, skyscrapers.
Where was that bass?
Fighters and Wall Street traders. We come together on the subway cars. Diversity unified, whoever you are. We doing fine on the 1 and 9 line. On the L, we doing swell. On the number 10 bus, we fight
I mean, that bass just makes the track so much better. Where was it in the original? Andy is taking that bass, bringing it out, recognizing that it is like one of the things that moves the groove in this track. I find his background, ambient, sampley stuff to be better in Andy's, just because there's a little more space around it. It's not so like dry and right up against your ears. And his vocal treatment is way better. The original just sounds like a bunch of guys spitting into SM58s like at a live show, recorded right off the desk. And it only sounds good in the way that like you want it to sound like super authentic and like a bunch of guys at a live show and not like a record kind of thing. But Andy respects that we're not trying to go hi-fi with these vocals while still making them sound more controlled and getting rid of some of that low mid like build-up and funk inside the vocal that's just kind of amateur sounding in the original, to be honest. Listen to those two biggest differences. Just, I think, how much better Andy is handling the vocal treatment, making them still sound raw, but so much more palatable and streamlined and smooth and controlled while still sounding raw and organic and human. And he's bringing out those little bits in the bass that really the whole groove of this record, I think, rotates around. And he's just making that potentially annoying background swirling synth loop sound better. So here's our original again. I'll bring us past the intro.
Brooklyn, Bronx, Queens, and Staten, from the Battery to the top of Manhattan, Asian, middle.
Do you hear how cloudy that bass sounds and how cloudy the vocals sound? And now here's Andy's.
Brooklyn, Bronx, Queens, and Staten, from the Battery to the top of Manhattan, Asian, Middle Eastern, and Latin, black, white, New York, you make it happen. Brownstones, water towers, trees, skyscrapers, riders, prize fighters, and Wall Street traders. We come together on the subway cars, diversity unified, whoever you are. We doing fine on the 1 and 9 line, on the L, we doing swell on the number 10 bus. We fighting fuck.
That bass is so much better. I don't know exactly what he's doing to it, but it sounds like there's less low mid content and more center mid, upper mid content. Maybe he's adding some harmonics to it. Just making bass work better in records is one of the things I like Andy for. A great song for this is one of the iconic Nirvana bass lines. It's got to be Lounge Act. And this is another one where he's able to make Chris's really unique, unusual, interesting sounding bass line super audible without detracting from guitars. Listen for that a little bit in Lounge Act, probably one of my favorites off of Nevermind. Here we go. Just that width and ambience right there in the beginning is very Andy. Guy knows when to highlight something. That guitar that comes in over on the right speaker just for a second, and he just brings that out and lets it be bright. Just his ability to keep the bass there like so audible. If you want to tune into the bass, you can. And if you want to tune out of it into the rest of the track, you can. So I don't have another mix of Lounge Act to show you, but I think that's just exemplary of how well he handles bass. And I feel like Butch might not have been able to do that with the bass on a song where I think the bass is so important. All right, there's so many more tracks we could listen to. There's a Foo Fighters record where every odd numbered track here was mixed by Andy Wallace. Every even numbered track was mixed by somebody else. I have a few special requests in here I'm going to get to. I've seen your chats coming in, and we'll go through some of your chats. Someone wanting me to talk more about the snare and listening on a few tracks in particular to what he thinks are very distinctive Andy Wallace snares, and I will get to that. And I'm going to go through all of your chats. Unfortunately, since I started this live stream in total silence, I'm going to have to trim out the beginning, which means for the replay, your live chats will disappear. But I'll try to find all of the most interesting ones and read them out loud for people who are checking it out. So he did all these Rage Against the Machines records. And one of the things I want to show here is he's able to get these powerful sounding records, but they do not sound like modern productions. I mean, we're talking about things from the mid 90s, late 90s, early 2000s. And then I'm going to play you a much more recent Rage Against the Machine album. This was their last album, released in the year 2000. And even then, we hear things shifting towards this more modern, more bombastic style of record production. And we can contrast that to Andy's 90s mixes. So here's Killing in the Name of. And for such a powerful sounding record, there's not a ton of like vocal compression and stuff going on. Let's listen to what's happening. Here's Killing in the Name of, Rage Against the Machine, mixed by Andy Wallace. And just a little bit of space and ambience around those percussive elements and even around the bass. Sometimes he has a little chorusy effects on bass. Sometimes there's a little bit of reverb on bass. Like he just has this little sense of space in there. And I got to say, those percussion instruments in the beginning of this track and the ambience around them is part of what makes this mix and this song work. Isn't it amazing how incredibly audible that bass is the whole time without detracting from the mass and size of the guitars? Few people are able to pull that off. Just listen to that. Bass, you can hear every single note and every single articulation in it, while the guitars are still allowed to sound more massive. And you hear that hard left to right panning on the cymbals. Like one side of the kit has certain cymbals, the other side of the kit has different cymbals, and he's really making that stereo left to right spread in the cymbals really clear. And there's not a whole lot of unnecessary stuff in them. With the overheads, I really feel like he's treating them, again, getting rid of low frequency that he doesn't need in the overheads and getting rid of extreme high frequencies he doesn't need in the overheads, focusing those overheads into the mid-range and going super wide with them. Let's listen to a big song off of, I think it was an album or two later that he didn't mix, off the Battle of Los Angeles. This is maybe 2 albums later, just a different mixer's approach to the same band. Let's see if we can hear differences. So this is not Andy Wallace, different album. So here, the bass is prominent. The bass is an important instrument in Rage Against the Machine, but the size of the bass in this one, the loudness of it, kind of makes Tom Morello's guitar sound a little bit small in this section. But the biggest difference for me is just the way, on this one, the way cymbals are handled. The cymbals are much more like of a centered wash going on here. Like they're this washier, kind of darker thing that's all centered, where Andy's is kind of a little bit more shimmery and further out. So listen to the cymbals here in this section of Guerrilla Radio. Further back. Versus the cymbals on Killing in the Name. So obviously a very different cymbal pattern and different cymbal selection, but you can just hear the kind of brightness and this narrow upper mid-range focus of them. There's a little bit more shimmer without having extreme excessive stuff above 10K and without having all this kind of like murky body that are in the cymbals in the other. It's just more like localized and there's more space around the cymbals. Let's see if we can hear a little bit more of that slightly earlier on. Listen to those cymbals. Especially here. Do you hear how localized the cymbals are in that and how bright they are? Again, coming up. Versus how they're handled in guerrilla radio. There's kind of this dark, murky, centered thing where the opening hi-hat, like the open hi-hat thing, it comes out a little louder and brighter than the rest of it. And Andy wouldn't settle for that kind of cymbal sound. That's part of his thing, just how like discreet the cymbals are. Another song that gets brought up a lot, I don't think this one is his. Let me see. Yeah, this is Bomb Track is a different one. Okay, Bulls on Parade. This is one that Andy mixed from Evil Empire, the next record, and it's starting to get a little bit more bombastic, but not as bombastic as records will get later on. So let's see this. Evil Empire, something like a handful of years later, 1996. Let's listen to a little bit of Bulls on Parade. This is Andy Wallace again. And even though the cymbals are more centered here, they're not completely centered. Like there's this ambience around them. There's this little bit of reverb around the cymbals. They're so faint in the mix, but so audible at the same time, right? It's so rare that there's a mixer who like makes me like cymbals. Like most of the time, like cymbals are like the worst thing in every mix, right? Or the thing that we're struggling with the most, like, my snare's not loud enough, my kick's not loud enough, my guitars aren't big enough, these cymbals are making everything sound tiny, but he makes these cymbals just be so clear, so audible, like you can hear the nuances of a real human player crashing away at this crash cymbal. You hear his humanity, but it's never annoying and it's never taking away from the power of other things. And I'm making you focus in on something that's like one of the quietest things in the mix, but because like you can still hear it. And one of the big things the cymbals aren't doing is taking away from the power of the guitars and the bass. Listen to that again. Again, the space around that, and we're hearing the swell around that guitar. There's a little bit of mixing movement. Listen to what's happening in the guitar that's panned to your right. Hear the ambience around it and the swelling that's happening. Not just the Ottawa effect that Tom is doing, but this little bit of movement that Andy is adding to that right pan guitar. The man does a volume ride, ratcheting up the level of that right pan guitar a little bit each time. And it starts so small and gets so big where it's almost as big as the rest of the band, and then the band comes in even bigger. It's just good mixing. It's good macro dynamics. A little bit more.
The microphone explodes, shattering the mold. Either drop the hits like they la or get the fuck off the commode with the short shot. Sure to make the bodies drop, dropping no copy, yo, no corners of co-op. Terror rain stretching, quenching the thirst of the power dawn. That five-sided fist.
And again, the bass and the guitar are playing the same line that are doubling each other, but he separates them so well. Do you hear how the bass is a little bit more to the left and the guitar is a little bit more to the right, and they both have totally different tones and different space around them? Just the separation between bass and guitar is so much better here on Bulls and Parade than it was on a Guerrilla Radio from this other mixer. Listen to that relationship between bass and guitar here in the verse. And he's really does not have a heavily compressed, heavily processed vocal sound. The vocals are well controlled while still sounding raw and not hyper compressed. All right. Listen to that bass leaning to the left, guitar leaning to the right, and just how even though they're doubling each other, they're separate from each other.
Get the fuck up the commode with the short shot. Sure to make the body drop, but no copy, yo, no corners of co-op. Terror rains drenching, quenching the thirst of the power dawn. That five-sided pentagon.
And that ride cymbal is actually listenable. Like the ride cymbal actually makes me go like, oh, right, that's why there are cymbals on drum kits. You can like do human things with them that are expressive. And that's not how cymbals sound in most mixes.
It's sore on the face of the earth gets bigger. The triggers go empty your pulse.
It's almost like they have a point to exist, the cymbals.
Family, with a pocket full of shells.
Listen to that stupid, gnarly bass sound there. That is stupid and gnarly. The bass sound is going to change here from the verse to the chorus. Listen to that change in bass sound. All right, here's where it's going to change. Listen to the bass change. I mean, the full humanity of that bass player is on display, warts and all. Like his awkward, slightly awkward timing in this thing, his, you know, you can tell he's like feeling it, you know? His timing is not perfect. He's kind of like rushing a little bit, but he's being human. He's being expressive. And Andy is able to kind of polish these things and smooth these things out without like ironing out the humanity of the artist. And I think one of the things, it's actually been hip to complain about Andy Wallace's mixing. Because, you know, Kurt Cobain said, you know, he didn't love the mixing on Nevermind and really wanted to go with the in utero sound. There's something I totally respect about that. Like when I was young listening to Nirvana, I preferred the in utero sound and the in utero vibe, and partly because it was less popular, you know, and like just for the people who really understood, you know. But there's this aspect of like, no, there's some mastery in what Andy's doing. And one of the things that might make people self-conscious, and this was true with At the Drive-In too. They said, oh man, it just was too polished because of Andy's mixing. We'll listen to At the Drive-In later. It is not too polished, and not by a long shot. In fact, they did records later on that are more polished sounding than Andy's mix. What might annoy people about Andy's mix is you actually hear the full humanity of every player. Like you hear the personality of that bass player. You hear the personality of that drummer and the way they like to hit cymbals. You hear the personality of the bass player and the way he's sometimes rushing and dragging. You hear the personality of all these distinct individuals. You hear the personality of Chris Novoselic and his bass lines and of Kurt's guitar strums on the Nirvana stuff. And that can be probably painful to listen to because you're hearing yourself under the microscope. And Andy might trust you more than you trust yourself. You know, like I hear the way Andy Wallace listens to something. He's like, oh, that's interesting. That's a unique thing that they're doing. How do I bring that out more? How do I make what's quirky and different about this band even more apparent while still making it feel polished and well-controlled and masterful? And you as a band member might go like, I can hear everything too clearly. Like I hear myself. I feel heard. This is weird. And I think that's what Andy's doing is he's not over polishing things. He's making human beings feel heard. And sometimes that's scary to us. That's the scariest thing about recording, right? Going under that, like when the red light turns on and you feel like your takes are worse than when the red light was off, because all of a sudden you have this self-consciousness, right? You're conscious of yourself existing. And I think that's what Andy Wallace's mixes can kind of do, is that they can make you conscious of the humanity of each player in the mix. And when he's doing that to you, he is making you feel self-conscious. Because you're conscious of yourself and your humanity. You're not being covered up by the bass covering you up and the cymbals covering you up and all that stuff. Like, if you're doing something that's human and unique, he's going to accentuate it. And I think that's part of what makes his mixes successful. They are not overly polished mixes. I think that is wrong. And people who say Andy Wallace's mixes are over-polished mixes are wrong. That's my opinion. Shade thrown! Now, here's a later mix from another mixer, later album, to hear what happens to record production. Now, first of all, Bulls on Parade, that production is so good, it makes me wish these guys weren't a bunch of idiot Marxists. Oh, did I say that out loud? I'm not supposed to say that out loud. Okay, Renegades of Funk. Let's listen to a little bit of Renegades of Funk just to hear how far things change just in 4 years in record production. So here's Bulls on Parade, one more time, a little bit of it.
With a pocket full of shells.
And here is Renegades of Funk from the album Renegades.
No matter how hard you try, you can't stop us now. No matter how hard you try, you can't stop us now. We're the renegades in this atomic age. This atomic age of renegades. Renegades in this atomic age.
Not an Andy Wallace mix. He would not do this with the bass.
Atomic age of renegades. Since the prehistoric ages and the days of ancient Greece, walked down through the Middle Ages. Planet Earth kept going through changes, and then the Renaissance came. And times continue to change. Nothing stayed the same.
Do you hear how big and tall and deep and wide this mix is? And it is louder sounding than Andy's mixes. And this is where we start to hear more compression and more limiting in records. This is, I believe, the year 2000, this record, but it's just going to go more and more in this direction. And this is where we're starting to get to the sound that Chad Blake will perfect later on. We did a Mix Masters video with Chad Blake, and you really get the sense of just tall, deep, and wide, and enveloping, and massive. And that's what's happening here with Renegades of Funk. It's a little bit less of this band where you can hear all of the human details in it, and it starts to become this increasingly massive, unified wall of...
But they were always renegades, like Chief Sitting Bull, Tom Paine, Dr. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. They were renegades of their time and age, so mighty renegades.
So that's just a much more modern sounding production than even Bulls on Parade, which was modern for its time.
We rally round our family with a pocket full of shells.
Right? In context, back and forth next to each other, this Andy Wallace mix from just a few years earlier, I think 1996, it sounds so small and so mid-rangey and so not wide. And we were just vibing out, right? To these Andy Wallace mixes from 1992, from 1990, from 1996, and going like, actually, that's, is impressive in its own way. But then you listen to like the 2000 style of production where it's like, let's lean into those limiters, let's make things louder, let's make them even wider, let's make everything even bigger. And all of a sudden, Bulls on Parade next to it is going to sound tiny.
We rally round our family with a pocket full of shells.
That is going to sound small and mid-rangey compared
No matter
to...
how nations listen and grew from land to land, singing electronic chants like Zulu Nation.
Here.
We're the renegades of funk. We're the renegades of funk.
Especially...
Galaxies away ages. Planet Earth kept going through changes, and then the Renaissance came. And times continue to change. Nothing stayed the same, but they were always renegades like Chief Sitting Bull, Tom.
Like, it's hard to stand up to that with something like this. Like, your ears have to reacclimate to, hey, sounds are allowed to be a little bit more mid-rangey. It doesn't have to be as loud. It doesn't have to be as wide. And that's why things, once they start to get big and loud, they tend to creep towards big and loud. Now, that said, we're listening to these without volume normalization on, and that's part of the impact of this. Now, if you have volume normalization turned on Spotify or on YouTube or whatever, the level of something like Renegades of Funk is going to get turned down. So that difference will be less apparent. And that would be a good comparison to make as well, is to listen to how things sound, not only in a quick A/B sip test right next to each other, where louder, taller, bigger, deeper, wider is going to sound better, but like get them to the same level and then listen to them over a long period and see which mix works better for you. And that's pretty important. All right, we've got more stuff here. Sheryl Crow, we've got some stuff he did on her. This is very different than the stuff we've listened to before, right? The differences on these albums maybe aren't as huge as some of the others, but these are totally worth listening to. The Strokes, we can hear the difference between the original Strokes album and then the one that Andy Wallace mixed. So the first two Strokes albums, Room on Fire and Angles, I think these are the two that were done by Gordon Raphael. And they're very Strokesy, very mid-rangey. And then we can hear Andy Wallace's take on one of his songs. So let's do a little bit of that. So here is the first Strokes record. Interesting, so much silence in the beginning. That's a long bit of silence in the beginning. Not mixed by Andy. And in a way, this is mixed terribly and everything's wrong, but it totally works, right? Why is the cymbal all the way to my right? Like, why is the hi-hat there? And why is it so loud? And why is the record so mid-rangey? But totally works. Honestly, if you have a band that knows how to groove, you can get away with so many production sins. Like, each of these production sins is just personality at this point.
He seemed impressed by the way you came in. Tell us a story. I know you're not boring. I was afraid that you would not insist.
So there's their first record. Here is, I think, their second record. I have to double check that. That might not be their second record. But let's compare their first record to the one Andy did. So here's their first record. Again, play a little bit of that. I'm going to double check my Strokes selections, but I definitely know this is the one Andy did. First Impressions of Earth is the album he did, I believe. So this is 2006, so you can tell we're getting way louder on the loudness scale here. I can actually check exactly how loud. Let's do that. So this is relatively bright and compressed sounding for Andy's style. And if you compare that to the record way before that Gordon Raphael does, I mean, it's just a totally different type of record production. So it's kind of a hard comparison to make. This is not Andy and not the same album.
He seemed impressed by the way you came in. Tell us a story. I know you're not boring.
Honestly, the early Strokes records, it's kind of a vibe. Totally makes sense for what it is. Now, let's listen to another album where the artist complained. I'm going to get to Slayer in just a minute, too, by the way. But before we get to metal and before we get to pop punk, let's just do a little bit of another artist that complained about Andy Wallace's mixing, and that is At the Drive-In. Let's play a little bit off of their first album, and then we'll play a big hit off of the album that Andy Wallace mixed. So here's the first album, In Casino Out. I'll go a little further ahead. A little further ahead.
No sign of relief. Just this you know, this is forever. It's 'cause this is forever. Make no difference, your alphabet is missing letters. 7 bomb.
So I'm jumping around the song a little bit, but that's their first album. And here is the album right before Andy was involved. And now here's the album that Andy mixed that at least one band member complained was too polished.
Yes, this is the campaign slithered entrails in the cargo bay. A new turd is the vastness, hollow vacuum, choppy oxygen tanks.
So that is not polished. That is just better. I mean, come on. Is this in some way, I'm going to play you the record right before this. Is this in some way better than the other mix? Here's the album right before it, not mixed by Andy. Like, the only possible benefit to this is you can't hear things as well, so you can't tell what they're, like, doing wrong or how human they are or whatever. I'm sorry, but it's just kind of a little bit muddy, where we listen to One Arm Scissor and it's superhuman.
This is the campaign slithered entrails in the cargo bay.
Like, yes, he did a fancy little thing with the vocal, but it's cool. It fits the vibe of the music.
A new turd is the vastness, hollow vacuum, choppy oxygen tanks.
Like, are you mad that he gave you, like, a slightly pan-telephony voice? Come on. Give me a break.
They hibernate, but how they kiss the ground, pucker up and kiss the asphalt now.
He's just helping them sound like even better guitar players and bass players and drummers. Like, he's just making them sound like they're good at what they do, and each part that they play in the band is worth hearing.
Tease this amputations, linted larynx, it has access now.
Now, these cymbals are a little louder than I usually like cymbals, but the drummer is so good, and you can just get a sense for, like, his actual human expressiveness on these cymbals.
Banged on memory, mummified circuitry, skin graft, machinery. Sputnik sickles found in the seats. Self-destruct sequence. This section is non-operational. Species
That is such good mixing. Like the little things he's doing, those stereo vocals and the ambience on them, it's not a ton. It's not a ton, but it helps. Like every little flourish he's doing on top of the band helps. And what's helping do is like it 100% serves the song, 100% serves the arrangement, 100% serves the performances. I'm never hearing the mix more than I'm hearing the band. Like, unless you're in the mode of like listening for the mix, you're just thinking when you listen to this mix, this band rocks. They are awesome. They're great at playing their instruments. The guitar parts and drum parts and bass parts go really well together. Wow, that was a really cool background vocal. Like, that's what you're consciously thinking, unless you're trying to listen critically from mix stuff. And then if you listen critically from mix stuff, you can understand how Andy is helping that happen. But this is absolutely brilliant mixing. Now, it's easy to appreciate it when we're listening to this by itself, but if we listen to even later At the Drive-In records, are even more amped up because they're even more in the future, right? This one is from 2000. So records are starting to get more loud. They're starting to get more limited. My only complaint about this mix on Relationship of Command, this album, is that the choruses, since the verses are so loud and so powerful, like it almost doesn't have another level to go to in the choruses. And I won't say there's a letdown, but you don't get that slight amping up I'd love to have into the chorus. But that's going to be even less possible later on as records get crushed even more and more. In fact, I think I have a much later At the Drive-In record mixed by somebody else in the year 2017 At the Drive-In. Man, they made a record that late. This one is mixed by somebody else, and it's just another level of how tall, deep, and wide and loud things can go. So here is a little bit of Inter Alia mixed by someone else 17 years later. Now here, this is a style where I'm just much more aware of it being a production and much more aware of it being a mix. Now, to me, that is a more process-sounding mix. I hear more compression, more limiting, everything's steady. It's not that vibe that Andy has, where we are starting to get more limiting when we get to a track like One Arm Scissor, but this is a great happy medium point, I think, from where record production has gone and where it came from. And this is right at that nexus around the year 2000, where things start to shift from that older 90s production style to the production style that would dominate in the 2000s and 2010s. And it's just such a cool balance. Listen to that song, One Arm Scissor, if you've never heard it before. It is a masterpiece, both in production, writing, and mixing when it comes to just weird music that has guitars in it. System of a Down is another band we could listen to. Man, I have the same thing happening here. Record he did, record somebody else did for System of a Down. These guys are a slightly more metal-y rather than hardcore-y version of the same thing. Really interesting guitar parts and vocals. Man, I could just sit here and listen to a bunch of System of a Down with you. They're great. But I want to take it back into the past and play you some Slayer. Ooh, I could also play you a little bit of this, a little bit of Blink-182. Like, we could hear a song that Andy mixed from Blink-182. And a song that someone else mixed from Blink-182. So that is not Andy's mix. That does make the cymbals apparent and wide, but in a more obvious way than Andy would do. Like, this is just, I don't think what he would get. I think it goes further than him. But this one is my favorite.
We all do. I am a child inside. Back up and give me some room. I'm just a bastard child. Don't let it go to your head. I'm just a waste of your time. Maybe I'm better off dead.
So if you're into pop punk stuff, I've got a bunch of Blink-182 here in this playlist. I got a bunch of Bad Religion, got a bunch of Descendants. You can listen to it in of your own time. I got Sum 41 here, a whole bunch of Linkin Park. Man, I even listened to a whole bunch of Limp Bizkit, so you wouldn't have to. Or you can, if you like Limp Bizkit. You can hear Andy Wallace mixing Limp Bizkit compared to somebody else. But that time listening to Limp Bizkit is time that I cannot get back. So I'm sad for that. But let's go back in time and listen to Slayer. And we'll end this off with some metal. Now, this guy has mixed Slayer, and he's also mixed Jeff Buckley and Sheryl Crow. So how's that for range, right? But let's see what years Hell Awaits from Slayer. Now, again, I did get some pushback on playing really vulgar and blasphemous stuff on a prior stream. So Hell Awaits, I didn't know this always, but the lead singer and bass player from Slayer is apparently like a Christian and like a practicing Catholic. And I think he like the guitarist wrote almost all the lyrics. And yeah, there's some like demonic stuff in the lyrics, but there's also just some like straight up biblical stuff, like just about like hellfire and stuff, right? And there's also some, there's political stuff. There's all sorts of weird lyrics, but I don't think most people listen to Slayer for the lyrics. They listen to Slayer to thrash the heck out. And that is what we're going to do. And I'm going to play you a little bit of Hell Awaits so I can remind you what metal production sounded like in 1985. And then we will listen to, a few years later, I think it's 1987, Rain in Blood by Slayer, and just to hear how different the take on metal production is. So here's a little bit of Hell Awaits off of the album, Hell Awaits by Slayer. Man, long intro. But it does go with the vibe, right? Of Hell Awaits, of Hell Awaiting. I'm going to skip a little further ahead so we can get to the meat of the production. Like, listen to that gigantic plate, or is it like a bright hall reverb on the snare and toms. And the guitars actually sound kind of like wimpy and tiny, don't they? Like all these big drums with a big reverb on them are making the guitars sound small and anemic. Dude, that like does not sound heavy. I mean, it sounds like an 8-year-old kid trying to make his little metal Matchbox toy cars like seem evil, you know? It's just kind of like tinny and tiny. Now let's check out a little bit of Angel of Death off of Slayer's Rain in Blood. And just hear the total different approach here. Let me know what you hear. So yes, metal production does go on to get even more massive than this, but this is just such a far cry from the prior record. I mean, this is, it's a remaster 2015. I think the album was like 1987 or something like that. But just the huge difference in how this sounds compared to the prior record. Like, I know you want to be tough and badass, but I'm sorry, it's not. Like, maybe it would be tough and badass live, but this right now, and also the band isn't as good at this point, but this sounds like, I don't know, like Judas Priest if they sucked or something. Or I should have said Iron Maiden. Iron Maiden if they sucked is what I meant. And then you listen to Angel of Death.
The meaning of pain, the way that I want shit to die.
I mean, just how much more focus there is on the guitars. And the drums are still there. They're still loud enough, but they don't take away from the power of the guitars. And there's no cheesy, cloying reverb all over everything. That first scream note is so iconic on Rain and Blood. I mean, it sounds like a guitar, right? It sounds like a lead guitar coming in, but it turns out to be Tom Arroyo's voice just starting up there and then going all the way down to that low growl. Such an iconic performance. But man, the specifically Andy-ish things about this mix are he lets the guitars be big. He doesn't let the drums dwarf the guitars. Important concept in rock mixing. Yes, some rock mixes should have extremely loud snare drums, but Andy makes sure that you hear the drums and know exactly what's going on without making the guitars sound less powerful. Also, the localization that he has on the cymbals and the toms is insane. Like the cymbals and the toms are practically all the way to the left on this intro. Listen to where the cymbals and toms are and listen to how they compare to the guitar. Also, that's definitely 100% Andy putting that kind of ambience on that guitar that's on the right. That is not how that guitar sounds off the amp. I know it. Like it's almost like a comb filtering effect he's doing on this guitar. It can't possibly be in the original amp sound. Listen to those cymbals, space around them. I mean, the space and localization on the cymbals and toms. Listen to that. Now, if you listen to this next to even more modern metal production, it could sound a little wimpy and mid-rangey and undynamically controlled and not tall, deep, and wide and fat and hard. But like once you actually get into the record and you listen to the first 30 seconds of it and your ears are acclimated to this era of record production, it's good record production. And it totally works. I've got some more metal here, Atreyu, another band, in case you guys want to hear that, but a whole bunch of his stuff that you can hear. I'm going to really quick go through some comments to see what people have been saying in here, because these chats are going to go away once I cut out my totally messed up intro. Oh, Aaron Loves Gear says, if you recall, Justin, one of my mix review references, he's a member of the members only mix feedback sessions, so you should check that out. Members only mix feedback. It's $5 a month to be part of it. We listen to some of your favorite records and then listen to your records next to them and see like what is separating your records from your favorite records. And actually, let me pull this up here so it's a little less distracting. He says, if you recall, who am I? Am I like the nanny, Fran Dreicher over here? If you recall, if you will recall, says, oh man, I've lost my chat. If you recall, Justin, one of my mix review references was Family System by Chevelle. You said it had the worst snare in the world, and you said it was also the best snare in the world. Okay, let's listen to that song, Family System by Chevelle. This is an Andy Wallace mix. Hopefully I'm pronouncing the band name right. Tell me if I've got it or not. I spelled it wrong for sure. I said this was like the worst snare sound in the world, but also the best. I mean, do you hear what I mean about metal production getting even bigger and fatter and badder since Slayer, Rain and Blood 1987? This is, I mean, you can just hear it from these guitars already. What year is this? This has got to be 2010s or something. No, 2002. It's already sounding like this. I wonder if it's a remaster or not, but already we're getting that loud in 2002. What is that, like a China ride or something? What do they call it? It's like almost a gong-like cymbal that Andy is just letting stand out, and he puts a real sense of space around it. That snare, it's like this, it sounds like this super tiny, like super high tuned popcorn snare. And in a way, it's like the worst sounding snare, this little tight popcorn snare, but it makes the guitar sound so big. And Andy is able to make it sound so audible without diminishing the power and size of the guitars at all. Andy does that so well. So that's Andy Wallace in 2002. Great sounding mix. Now, Aaron Loves Gear also said, "Oh snap, Andy Wallace, hope you devote some time to that famous snare sample of his. Love it. Some examples: Dig by Mudvayne, The Red by Chevelle, Blurry by Puddle of Mud. So fake, yet so glorious, LOL." Let's listen to a few of the tracks he's picked for us. So here's another one off of Chevelle called The Red. Let's pay attention to the snare.
Seeing red again. This change he won't contain. Slip away.
Again, just how like perfectly placed those cymbals are. Andy Wallace is making me like cymbals. It's so weird. I hate cymbals, but he does it so well. Also, the snare here is not the same exact snare as the prior one. It's a different snare sound. So that, I think, lends credence to the idea that Andy is not usually doing straight out replacement, but rather augmentation. Maybe the kick is replaced. I don't know if the kick is replaced or augmented, but yeah, powerful sounds.
To clear your mind.
That's so Andy there, to have that little affected background vocal throw off to the side. He's so cool about placing things. He is not a left, center, right mixer, right? He is not putting things just 100% left, center, and right, which I like. It's a style that I really dig. You know, Chris Lord-Alge, Tom Lord-Alge, I think both of them are, you know, left, center, right first people, but he's all about localization, like pinpointing something just somewhere in the stereo field. And you can hear how that little Let It Show background vocal is just slightly to the left, and he's put so much sense of space around it, like it existing in a real world environment.
Who made it show?
You could like reach out and grab that background vocal, right? Where it is. Maybe it shows just right there. It's right there. Just grab it.
The truth he gives into most. So lay down.
Interesting. Once the chorus hits, how much of a back seat he lets the snare take so that the guitars can feel big. The snare here is almost A tier along with the guitars, but then that chorus hits and it just tucks back as the guitars come even more forward. Listen to that change, verse to chorus.
He gives into most.
Front and center.
So lay down. The pain is real.
Do you hear how much more muted that snare becomes in the chorus compared to the verse? He's letting it have this darker, softer tone, automating it down so that it can feel like the amps got bigger and the band got bigger.
So lay down.
And honestly, this is a brilliant way that he's handling the demands of high loudness, right? Because this is 2002. I bet this might be like -7 lufs or something. So it's really hot, fairly limited. And one of the ways he's making it sound and feel loud is the verse and the chorus are almost the same level. Like there's only this tiny bit louder that the chorus could get over the verse because the verse is already so loud. That the way he deals with it is by tucking the snare so it feels like the guitars got even bigger than they did. It's like an optical illusion, right? When you only have 12 inches on the ruler and you're ready at inch number 11, how do you make that change from 11 to 12 feel really big? And what he's doing here, I don't know if I have a good visual analogy for this, but he's taking the snare, which is at like inch number 11 with everything else, and he's now bringing it to inch number 9 on the ruler. So when everything goes up to 12, now it feels like they went from 11 to 13 or 14, right? Because the snare tucked back from 11 down to 10 or 9. So it gives us this impression of there being extra space, even though the overall level doesn't go up that much. Let's listen to that transition one more time. That's a good way of handling the trade-offs of reduced dynamics.
Into most. So lay down. The threat is real. When his side goes red again.
Brilliant. All right, and then a couple more requests. He says the snare sounds on Puddle of Mud and Mudvayne. Let's listen to a little bit of those.
When you shoved it in my face, explain you get to me.
Yeah, the snare does sound familiar. It's a very Wallacey sounding snare.
You could be my seed. You know that I'll protect you from all of the obscene.
But listen to how much quieter he lets the snare be in this, so the vocal can really be front and center, and some of those weird things that are happening in the guitars can be more front and center. This one's from 2001. And a little bit of Mudvayne. Oh man, that kind of kick pattern, that kick could be all replaced and edited for all I know. But it's not as ticky as some metal producers would do, where they just sound completely 100% triggered. There's still like some humanity and substance and heft and fluff in that kick drum. Interesting stuff. Let's go through some more chats here, see what they say. Yes, I had no audio for the first few minutes. I know. Someone was saying that, is the interface dying? There's quite a bit of glitching. Was that on me, or were you talking about the mix specifically? Someone was hearing maybe cell phone interference. Some of the differences here, less bass thickness, someone was saying. The Wallace mix is really intense. The Butch Vig has more natural and dirtier drums and less bassed guitar. Samson says, Butch's mix on Nevermind is way more raw. I wonder if he picked up some of Andy's tricks by the time he was mixing Garbage. I'd bet so. You have some cracking, Justin. Am I going to have to do this again at some point? Man, I'll have to check that out. Surprised by how much reverb he kept on the vocals. It says that the second mix, one person here says, very far off from the Beastie Boys sound, and amateurish is better for Beastie Boys, in my opinion, says Bradley. So yeah, there could totally be mixed opinions on this. Ben says, I prefer Andy's mix on the Beastie Boys stuff. I do too. Niall says the mix on Evil Empire is masterful, for sure. Ben says, I wonder if he used Pultex to do that to the simples, to bring attenuation and not so big of a boost, bringing them into focus. Yeah, I think that's something that Andy does, I know, in the low end on his bass, where he'll like boost low end on the bass, but then cut the low end below a certain point. That kind of trick you can do where you can do kind of resonant low end. And I wouldn't be surprised if he did that with high end as well. DJ Loop Beat says, 52 watching, only 30 likes. Give this man his due for putting in the work for us. Hit the like button. Yes, please do. Let's see if there's any more big comments here. Kevin says, supposedly he does most of the heavy lifting on the SSL board. Yes, he uses basically EQ and compression on the SSL board, and that's pretty much it. And then he uses probably more bus compression on the SSL board than on individual channels, to my understanding. Uses a lot of automation, and then uses a little bit of outboard. I think LA2A compressor occasionally on vocals, but he does not have that hyper modern sound usually of really, really compressed vocals with fast attack compression. And he has some outboard reverbs he uses and sometimes chorusy kinds of effects that you hear here and there. Digital glitching, but not all the time, just a few times. Interesting. I will have to listen for that. I wonder if my phone was doing something, but I will check into that. Thank you for letting me know about the issue. All right, last couple closing remarks here from me. I think I've said about all the stuff that I need to say about Andy Wallace. Great mixer. Does great stuff. His use of the way that he mixes cymbals really stood out to me today, of making me like cymbals. His ability to make bass super audible without making guitars sound small, and his ability to make kick and particularly snare feel really audible without making guitars sound small. He's masterful in all that stuff. Last things that I would say about Andy, just the lack of compression on this stuff in the 90s and the 2000s compared to today. Like, he does not have hyper compressed vocal sounds, and he really does bring the humanity out of every element. Like, when you listen to his mix of Smells Like Teen Spirit compared to Butch Vig's mix, it's just this different world where Andy is like, I want you to hear what Dave Grohl is doing on the cymbals. He made those choices with cymbals for a reason. I want you to hear the way Kurt is strumming the guitar. His inflection there is important and is an essential part of the song. And I don't want it to be missed in just a wash of massive muscular power. I want you to hear some of the details that were special to me. And he'll often do interesting things with background vocals, where he'll do a little bit of ear candy, but the ear candy on mixes that he does is pretty minimal. It's usually like, here's a background vocal I did something weird with. I'm panning it left to right here on Nevermind. I'm delaying it, making it telephony, and putting it, space-wise in the background here on At the Drive-In. And he's just doing little flourishes to background vocals to make things sound like there's ear candy in the record. And the rest of it is just like appreciating what each member of the band is doing well and trying to highlight it. So that's what I'm hearing. Also, the amount of reverb he uses compared to some of the other folks. That was one of the other things that I noticed. Just he's unafraid to say, okay, we can separate this guitar from the speaker a little bit. This guitar doesn't have to be glued right to the front of the speaker. Can we set it back a little further in the mix? So those are some of the things that I'm noticing. Hey, if you want to notice things more often, you should become a member of this channel, and you can get access to unlimited Q&As with me for $5 a month. You get the monthly Q&As and the monthly mix feedback sessions. We do one every other month. And in addition, you should check out one of our great full-length courses like Mixing Breakthroughs, Mastering Demystified, Compression Breakthroughs, EQ Breakthroughs, if you want to learn to mix masterfully. These are the most useful things I've ever done in my entire life. And if for some reason you've been listening to me talk about records for the past hour and a half, who better to actually learn about mixing and music production from? Someone who you apparently don't mind listening to. That's absolutely crazy that you don't mind listening to me this long. So that means that I like you. And it means that you would like one of my great full-length courses. They will 100% transform the way that you mix forever, for the better, guaranteed, or your money back. Also, you could check out Soundtoys because they have a gigantic sale right now on plugins, up to 70% off. There's some plugins right now that are as cheap as $29. You can check out their whole effects rack for a hugely discounted price. You can try out all of their stuff for free for 30 days. Please go check them out. Do yourself a favor over at soundtoys.com. They make absolutely wonderful stuff. Also, more plugin deals, Baby Audio. Go to babyaudio.io/SonicScoop. That's babyaudio.io/SonicScoop, where you can enter code SonicScoop at checkout for 15% off any Baby Audio plugin or bundle of plugins, even on top of a sale they might already have. Check them out at babyaudio.io/SonicScoop. Enter code SonicScoop at checkout for 15% off. Hey, thanks so much for hanging out with me. This has been Justin Colletti of SonicScoop. See you next time.